Amy Carter sat in the back row of the classroom, her pen moving across the paper as she took notes. Around her, the other students looked nothing like her. Some were tall and made of what looked like living crystal. Others had tentacles instead of arms and breathed through gills on their necks. A few looked like giant insects with multiple eyes and clicking sounds coming from their mouths. She was the only human in the entire Galactic Academy. The Academy floated in space, far from any planet. It was huge, with thousands of rooms and laboratories. Students from all over the galaxy came here to learn about science and how to be diplomats. Amy was here because of a special program that let one human student come to learn with the aliens. Most of the other students ignored her. They thought humans were stupid and primitive. Amy heard them talking about her when they thought she could not understand their languages. But Amy had been studying their languages for months before she came here. She understood more than they knew. Professor Veltar stood at the front of the class. He was one of the crystal people called Zephyrians. His body was transparent blue and sparkled when the lights hit it. He was talking about how spaceships could travel faster than light. The quantum field must be adjusted to exactly 47.3 terahertz, Professor Veltar said, writing numbers on the board that glowed in the air. This creates the bubble that allows faster-than-light travel. Amy looked at the numbers. She had been studying physics since she was a child on Earth. Her father was an engineer, and her mother was a mathematician. They had taught her to always check the math. Something was wrong with the professor's calculation. She raised her hand slowly. Professor Veltar looked surprised. Amy rarely spoke in class. "Yes, Miss Carter?" "I think there might be a small mistake in the calculation," Amy said quietly. "Should it be 47.8 terahertz instead of 47.3? The other students turned to stare at her. Some of the crystal students made a sound like wind chimes, which Amy knew meant they were laughing. The tentacle students, called Aquarians, changed color to show they were annoyed. Professor Veltar's crystal body flickered slightly. "Miss Carter, this formula has been used for over 200 years. I believe the advanced civilizations of the galaxy know better than—" He paused, clearly trying to be polite. "Perhaps you should focus on understanding the basic concepts first." Amy felt her cheeks get warm, but she nodded and looked down at her notes. She wrote down the professor's numbers, but she also wrote down her own calculation next to it. After class, Amy walked alone to the cafeteria. The food here was strange. Everything was designed to feed different types of aliens. There were liquid meals for the Aquarians, crystal formations for the Zephyrians, and something that looked like dirt for the insect-like species, called hive minds. Humans could eat the processed nutrition box, which tasted like cardboard, but had all the vitamins she needed. Amy sat at an empty table and pulled out her tablet. She had been working on something for weeks. It was a detailed study of all the different alien species at the Academy. She had learned about their strengths and weaknesses, their cultures, and how they thought. The Zephyrians were very logical, but did not like to change their minds once they decided something. The Aquarians were emotional and made decisions based on how they felt. The hive minds were smart, but they always had to agree with each other before doing anything, which made them slow. Amy had also been studying the news from around the galaxy. There had been strange attacks on some trade worlds recently. Ships had been destroyed and cargo stolen. The government said it was just pirates, but Amy noticed patterns in the attacks that seemed too organized for simple pirates. She looked up from her tablet and saw 3 Zephyrian students approaching her table. They were some of the most popular students in the Academy. Their leader was named Kethfer, and his crystal body was deeper blue than most others, which meant he was from an important family. "Human," Kethfer said, his voice making a musical sound. "We heard you tried to correct Professor Veltar today." Amy looked up at them. I just noticed the math seemed off. The math seemed off, repeated one of the other Zephyrians, and they all made the wind chime sound again. You have been here for 3 months, human. You should know your place by now. My place? Amy asked. You are here because the Academy Council wanted to appear generous, Kethver said. A charity case. Your species barely has interstellar travel. You should be grateful to observe real civilization, not embarrass yourself by questioning your betters. Amy felt anger rise in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. I was just trying to help. Help? Kethver leaned closer. Your species is known for violence and primitive thinking. The only thing humans are good at is fighting wars with each other. You have no place in a center of learning. The 3 Zephyrians walked away, still making their laughing sounds. Amy sat alone, her hands shaking slightly. She looked around the cafeteria and saw other students watching her. Some looked sorry for her, but most just looked uncomfortable. Amy closed her tablet and stood up. She walked to the big windows that showed the stars outside. The Academy was beautiful, floating in space like a jewel. But sometimes she felt very far from home. She thought about what Kethvar had said. It was true that humans fought a lot of wars. But that was not all they did. Humans also created art and music and poetry. They explored and discovered and invented. They survived in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands. They adapted to anything. Amy had come to the Academy to learn, but she was also learning things. The professors did not teach. She was learning how the different species thought and acted. She was learning their languages and their customs. She was learning about the galaxy and all its problems. Most importantly, she was learning that sometimes being underestimated could be useful. The next day, Amy got to class early. She always sat in the back, but today she chose a seat in the middle. When Professor Veltar started his lesson, Amy listened carefully. Yesterday's calculation was checked by the computer overnight, the professor announced. It appears there was indeed a small error. The correct frequency is 47.8 terahertz, not 47.3. Amy felt a small smile cross her face. She looked around and saw some of the other students glancing at her with surprise. Even Kethver looked confused. Professor Valtar continued the lesson without mentioning who had spotted the error. But Amy noticed that he looked at her differently. Now, not with respect, not yet, but with curiosity. Amy went back to taking notes, writing down everything she learned. She had a feeling that someday all this knowledge would be important. She did not know how important it would be, or how soon she would need it. Outside the windows, the stars continued to shine, peaceful and distant. But peace in the galaxy was more fragile than anyone at the Academy realized. Amy finished her notes and closed her notebook. She had learned something important today. Being right was not enough. She would need to be patient, careful, and ready, because eventually her chance to prove herself would come. She just hoped she would be ready when it did. Amy was in the library when the alarm started screaming. The sound was loud and sharp, cutting through the quiet study area like a knife. Red lights flashed on the walls, and an automated voice spoke in multiple languages. Emergency alert. All students report to the main assembly hall immediately. This is not a drill. Amy looked up from her books. Around her, alien students were standing up with confused expressions. Some were talking in their own languages, their voices worried and scared. Amy had been reading about galactic politics and trade routes. She had been tracking the pirate attacks that had been happening across the galaxy. What she found worried her. The attacks were too organized, too planned. They were not random piracy. They were something much worse. She gathered her books and followed the crowd of students toward the assembly hall. The hallways were filled with noise and confusion. Students were pushing past each other, trying to get information from there. Friends. In the assembly hall, hundreds of students packed together. The tall crystal Zephyrians stood like living statues, their bodies flickering with nervous energy. The tentacled Aquarians were changing colors rapidly, showing their stress. The insect-like hive minds were clustered in groups, clicking and buzzing to each other. Amy found a spot near the back and waited. Director Zenthal appeared on the main screen. She was a Zephyrian, ancient and wise, with a crystal body that was almost completely transparent. Her voice was calm but serious. "Students of the Galactic Academy," she began, "I must inform you of a serious situation. 1 hour ago, the Dominion fleet launched coordinated attacks on 3 major trade worlds. Dozens of ships have been destroyed, and millions of beings are in danger." The hall erupted in shocked gasps and worried voices. Amy felt her heart sink. The Dominion fleet was what she had been afraid of. They were not pirates. They were an alliance of aggressive alien species that wanted to conquer the galaxy. Director Zenthal continued. "The attacks appear to be the beginning of a larger military campaign. We have lost contact with 17 systems so far. The Galactic Council is meeting an emergency session to coordinate a response." A Zephyrian student near the front raised his hand. "Director, what does this mean for the Academy?" "The Academy is in neutral space," the director replied. "We are a place of learning, not politics. We should be safe here." Amy frowned. She had been studying the Dominion's tactics. They always went after educational centers and government buildings first. They wanted to destroy knowledge and capture important people to use as hostages. More students asked questions. The Aquarians wanted to know if they could return to their underwater cities. The hive minds wanted to know if their home colonies were safe. The Zephyrians wanted to know what diplomatic solutions were being tried. Amy raised her hand. Director Zenthal looked surprised. "Yes, Miss Carter?" "Director, I've been studying the pattern of attacks. Based on their previous campaigns, I think the Dominion will target educational centers and academies next. They want to capture students from important families to use as leverage." The hall became very quiet. Students turned to stare at Amy. Some looked annoyed that a human was speaking. Others looked worried. "Miss Carter," the director said carefully, "while your concern is noted, I believe you may be overestimating the threat. The Dominion would not attack a neutral educational facility." Amy felt frustrated, but she kept her voice respectful. "With respect, Director, I've been tracking their movements. They hit the Centauri Academy last month. They took 200 students hostage." "That was different," said Professor Veltar, who was standing near the stage. "That academy was involved in military research." "Actually," Amy said, pulling out her tablet, "I've been following the news reports. The Centauri Academy was also supposed to be neutral. The Dominion claimed they were developing weapons, but there was no proof." Director Zenthal looked uncomfortable. "Miss Carter, while I appreciate your interest in current events, I believe the senior faculty is better equipped to assess the situation." Amy sat down, feeling the familiar frustration of being dismissed. But she also felt something else. Fear. She was sure the Dominion would come here. All the signs pointed to it. The assembly continued for another hour. The faculty told everyone to stay calm and continue with their studies. They said the Academy's defense shields would protect them from any trouble. They said the Galactic Council would solve everything through diplomacy. Amy did not believe any of it. After the assembly, Amy walked quickly to her room. She had work to do. She pulled out her tablet and started writing. She had been studying every species at the Academy for months. She knew their strengths and weaknesses. She knew how they thought and how they made decisions. If the Dominion came, the Academy would need to defend itself. And that meant using every advantage they had. Amy worked through the night, creating detailed plans. She mapped out the academies. Layout, noting the best defensive positions. She analyzed the different species' abilities and how they could work together. She studied the Academy's equipment and resources, looking for things that could be used as weapons. She also studied the Dominion's tactics. They were aggressive and direct. They liked to use fear and overwhelming force, but they were also predictable. They followed the same patterns in every attack. The next morning, Amy's tablet chimed with a news alert. Another academy had been attacked. This one was closer to their location. The Dominion had taken 500 students prisoner. Amy ran to the assembly hall, but it was empty. She found some students in the cafeteria, talking in worried voices. When she asked about another assembly, they told her the faculty was handling the situation. Amy found Professor Veltar in his office. He was talking to 2 other faculty members, all of them looking stressed. "Professor," Amy said, knocking on the door, "I need to speak with you." Professor Veltar looked up, his crystal body flickering with annoyance. "Miss Carter, this is not a good time. It's about the Dominion." "Attacks," Amy said. "I think I know when they'll come here." The 3 faculty members looked at each other. One of them, a tentacled Aquarian named Professor Nethwa, spoke up. "Child, you should not worry about such things. Go back to your studies. I've been tracking their movement patterns," Amy insisted. "They're following the major trade routes, hitting academies and government centers. Based on their speed and direction, they'll be here within 2 days." Professor Veltar stood up. "Miss Carter, I understand you are frightened, but spreading panic will not help anyone. The Academy is protected by neutrality laws. The Dominion would not dare attack us." "They attacked the Centauri Academy," Amy said. "They attacked the Vegan Institute. They don't care about neutrality laws." "Those were different situations," Professor Nethwa said, her tentacles waving in dismissal. "This academy has students from every major species. Attacking us would mean war with everyone." Amy felt like screaming. "That's exactly why they'll attack. They want to start a war with everyone. They want to force the galaxy into choosing sides." The 3 professors looked at her with expressions of polite concern, like she was a child having a tantrum. Professor Veltar's voice was gentle but firm. "Miss Carter, I think you should speak with Counselor Hethen. This situation is causing you distress." Amy left the office feeling defeated. She walked through the hallways, seeing other students, going about their normal routines. Some were in study groups, others were playing games in the recreation areas. They all acted like nothing was wrong, but Amy could feel it in the air. Tension, fear. The faculty was worried, even if they would not admit it. The news reports were getting worse every hour. The Dominion was moving fast, and they were not stopping. For anyone, that afternoon, Amy was in the observatory when she saw them. Ships, dozens of them, moving in formation toward the academy. They were still far away, but they were coming fast. Amy recognized the design from the news reports. Long, dark vessels with sharp edges and glowing red engines. Dominion warships. Amy ran to the nearest communication panel and pressed the emergency button. "This is Amy Carter in Observatory 7. I'm detecting multiple ships approaching the Academy. They appear to be Dominion vessels." The response came back immediately. "Miss Carter, please return to your quarters. The faculty is aware of the situation." Amy stared at the communication panel. They knew. The faculty knew the Dominion was coming, and they were still not doing anything to prepare. Amy looked back at the approaching ships. They would be here in less than 6 hours. In 6 hours, everything would change. The peaceful academy would become a battleground, and Amy was probably the only person who was ready for what was coming. She left the observatory and walked quickly to her room. She had plans to make and preparations to finish. Because when the Dominion arrived. She would not be caught off guard. The war was coming whether anyone wanted it or not. The Dominion ships arrived exactly when Amy predicted they would. She was in her room, packing her tablet and some supplies into a bag, when the Academy shook. The lights flickered, and she heard the deep rumble of weapons hitting the shields. Her window, Amy could see the dark shapes of warships surrounding the Academy. Red beams of energy shot from their weapons, striking the Academy's protective barrier. Each hit made the barrier flicker like a soap bubble. The emergency alarms started screaming again. This time, they did not stop. Amy grabbed her bag and ran into the hallway. Students were everywhere, some crying, others running toward the transport. Bays, the crystal Zephyrians were flickering rapidly with panic. The tentacled Aquarians had turned pale colors that Amy knew meant extreme fear. Everyone remained calm, shouted Professor Veltar, his voice echoing through the corridors. Proceed to the emergency shelters in an orderly fashion. Amy pushed through the crowd, going against the flow of students. She needed to get to the command center. She had information that could help if anyone would listen to her. The Academy shook again, harder this time. Dust fell from the ceiling, and Amy heard the sound of metal bending. The shields were failing. She reached the command center just as Director Zenthal was receiving a transmission from the Dominion fleet. The message appeared on the main screen, showing the face of a reptilian alien with yellow eyes and sharp teeth. This is Commander Scare of the Dominion Third Fleet. Alien said, his voice like grinding stones. You will surrender immediately and prepare for boarding. Any resistance will result in the destruction of your station and everyone on it. Director Zenthal stepped forward, her crystal body shimmering with dignity. Commander, this is a neutral, educational facility. We are protected by galactic law. You have no authority here. Commander Scar's mouth opened, showing rows of sharp teeth. The old laws are dead. The Dominion makes new laws now. You have 10 minutes to lower your shields and prepare for boarding. If you refuse, we will take what we want from your wreckage. The transmission ended. The command center fell silent, except for the sound of weapons hitting the weakening shields. What do we do? Asked Professor Nethwa, her tentacles wrapped around herself in distress. We must evacuate, said another faculty member. Get the students to the escape pods. There are not enough pods for everyone, Director Zenthal said quietly. And the Dominion ships will destroy any pod that tries to escape. Amy stepped forward. Director, I have an idea. Several faculty members turned to look at her with expressions of annoyance. Miss Carter, this is not the time, Professor Veltar began. Yes, it is the time, Amy interrupted, her voice firm. You all think the Dominion is going to win because they have bigger weapons, but they are not smarter than us. They are not more creative. They just use fear and force because that is all they know. Director Zenthal looked at Amy with curiosity. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting we fight back, Amy said. Not with weapons we do not have, but with what we do have. We have the brightest minds from every species in the galaxy. We have advanced laboratories and equipment. We have knowledge they do not expect us to use. Fight back? Professor Nethwa's tentacles were writhing with shock. This is an academy, not a military base. That is exactly why we can win, Amy said. They expect us to be helpless academics. They expect us to surrender or run. They do not expect us to turn this place into a fortress. The academy shook again. Through the windows, Amy could see small ships detaching from the Dominion fleet. Boarding craft, coming to capture the station. We do not have weapons, Professor Veltar said. We have laboratories full of equipment that can be modified, Amy replied. We have students who know how to build things, program computers, and work with energy systems. We have the element of surprise. Director Zenthal was quiet for a moment, thinking, "What exactly are you proposing?" Amy pulled out her tablet, showing the plans she had been working on. "I have been studying the Academy's layout and the capabilities of each species here. The Zephyrians can modify energy systems because they understand crystal technology. The Aquarians can handle the life support and cooling systems because they know about fluid dynamics. The hive minds can coordinate communications because they work as a team naturally." "And what about the humans?" asked Professor Veltar, his voice carrying a hint of sarcasm. "Humans coordinate everything," Amy said simply. "My species has been fighting wars for thousands of years. We know how to take different groups with different abilities and make them work together. We know how to adapt when plans go wrong. We know how to win against bigger enemies." The Academy shook again, and this time they heard the sound of explosions. The boarding craft had reached the outer sections. "They are inside," Director Zenthal said quietly. Amy looked around the command center. "Then we need to move fast. Director, can you get on the communication system and tell everyone to go to the main laboratory complex instead of the shelters?" "Why?" "Because the shelters are traps. The Dominion will find them and capture everyone inside. But the laboratory complex has multiple levels and dozens of rooms. We can spread out, set up defenses, and make them work for every inch they take." Director Zenthal hesitated. The sounds of fighting were getting closer. Somewhere in the Academy, students were screaming. "Please," Amy said. "Trust me. I know this seems crazy, but sometimes crazy is the only thing that works." Director Zenthal looked at the other faculty members. They were all scared, but they were also desperate. The normal plan of surrendering or evacuating was not working. "All right," Director Zenthal said finally. "But you will need to convince the students. They will not want to fight." "Leave that to me," Amy said. Director Zenthal activated the Academy-wide communication system. "Attention all students and faculty. Please report to Laboratory Complex C immediately. Do not go to the emergency shelters. I repeat, report to Laboratory Complex C." Amy was already moving, running through the corridors toward the laboratory complex. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of fighting getting closer. The Dominion soldiers were advancing through the Academy. Meeting little resistance. She reached the laboratory complex and found hundreds of students already gathering there, looking confused and frightened. Many were crying. Some were arguing with each other in different languages. Amy climbed onto a table so everyone could see her. "Listen to me," she shouted. "I know you're all scared. I know this seems hopeless. But we are not helpless." The crowd turned to look at her. Some students were shaking their heads, not wanting to hear what she had to say. "The Dominion thinks we are weak because we are students," Amy continued. "They think we will surrender because we are not soldiers. But they are wrong. We are the smartest beings in the galaxy. We know things they do not know. We can do things they cannot do." "What can we do against warships?" shouted a Zephyrian student. "We can make them wish they had never come here," Amy replied. "We can turn their own tactics against them. We can make this academy into a place they cannot conquer." She jumped down from the table and walked to a computer terminal. "I need volunteers. Zephyrians who can modify power systems. Aquarians who can handle life support. Hive minds who can coordinate communications. Everyone else, I need you to help me turn laboratory equipment into weapons." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, a young Zephyrian stepped forward. "I can work with crystal technology," he said quietly. An Aquarian followed. "I know about fluid systems." Then more students came forward. Not all of them, but enough. They were still scared, but they were also angry. The Dominion had come to their home, their place of learning, and threatened to destroy it. Amy smiled for the first time since the attack began. Good. Now let me tell you what we are going to do. She began giving instructions, assigning different groups to different tasks. The Zephyrians went to modify the power systems, turning them into weapons and traps. The Aquarians went to the life support systems, preparing to use them to flood sections of the Academy with sleeping gas or disable the artificial gravity. The hive minds set up communication networks, creating a system that would let the defenders coordinate their actions. Other students began converting laboratory equipment into weapons, using their knowledge of physics and chemistry to create things the Dominion would not expect. Amy moved from group to group, checking on their progress and solving problems as they came up. She found herself thinking in ways she had never thought before, seeing connections and possibilities that her human brain was uniquely suited to find. As she worked, she realized something important. The other students were not just following her orders. They were starting to believe in themselves. They were remembering that they were not just students, but the future leaders and innovators of their species. And for the first time since the attack began, Amy thought they might actually have a chance. The sound of fighting was getting closer, but now she was ready for it. The Academy was no longer just a place of learning. It was about to become a battleground, and Amy intended to win. The first Dominion soldiers entered Laboratory Complex C 20 minutes after Amy's preparations began. They were large, reptilian creatures wearing black armor and carrying energy weapons. They moved in formation, expecting to find frightened students hiding in corners. Instead, they found empty corridors and silenced. Amy watched them through the security cameras from her position in the control room. She had 12 students with her, representing different species and different skills. They were all scared, but they were also determined. Remember, Amy whispered into her communication device, wait for my signal. Let them get deep into the complex before we spring the trap. The Dominion soldiers moved cautiously through the corridors, checking each room. They found laboratory equipment, but no students. They found computers, but no one using them. They began to relax, thinking. The area was empty. That was when Amy gave the signal. Now, the Zephyrian students activated their modified power systems. The lights in the corridor went out, plunging the Dominion soldiers into darkness. At the same time, the artificial gravity in their section shut off, making them float helplessly. In the air, the Aquarian students released sleeping gas through the ventilation system. The Dominion soldiers tried to put on breathing masks, but they were floating and disoriented. Within minutes, they were unconscious. Amy's team moved quickly, taking the soldiers' weapons and armor. They had won their first victory, but Amy knew it was only the beginning. Phase 1 complete, she reported to the other teams scattered throughout the Academy. The Dominion will send more soldiers now, and they will be more careful. She was right. The next group of soldiers came prepared, with emergency lights and gravity boots. They moved slower, checking every corner and doorway. They wore full environmental suits to protect against gas attacks, but Amy had expected this. She had studied human military history, learning about guerrilla warfare and unconventional tactics. She knew that the key to defeating a larger enemy was to never fight them directly. A second group of soldiers entered the complex and found it quiet again. They advanced carefully, their weapons ready. They reached the main laboratory and spread out to search it. Amy waited until they were in the perfect position, then activated the second trap. The hive mind students had been working on the computer systems. They had programmed the laboratory equipment to turn on all at once, creating a massive electromagnetic pulse. The pulse disabled the soldiers' electronic equipment, including their weapons and communication devices. At the same time, Amy's team released a cloud of metallic particles into the air. The particles stuck to the soldiers' armor and weapons, making them heavy and clumsy. The Aquarian students then flooded the room with a special liquid that made the floor extremely slippery. The Dominion soldiers found themselves sliding around helplessly, their weapons useless, their armor too heavy to move properly. Amy's team appeared from hidden positions and used stun weapons they had built from laboratory equipment to knock the soldiers unconscious. Phase 2 complete, Amy reported. We have captured 36 soldiers and all their equipment. Commander. Scar's voice came over the communication system, angry and frustrated. What is happening in there? Report. When he got no response, he sent 100 soldiers to the laboratory complex. Amy watched them coming through the security cameras and smiled grimly. She had been hoping for this. All teams prepare for Phase 3, she announced. Time to show them what happens when you threaten students. The 100 soldiers entered the complex in 3 groups, thinking they could overwhelm any resistance through sheer numbers. They wore the heaviest armor and carried the most powerful weapons. They were prepared for anything, except for what Amy had planned. She had spent the last hour studying the soldiers' tactics and equipment. She had noticed that they all used the same communication frequency and the same type of armor. They were organized and disciplined, but they were also predictable. Amy had the hive mind students create a computer virus that would infect the soldiers' communication systems. When the soldiers tried to coordinate their attack, the virus spread through their network, causing their equipment to malfunction. At the same time, Amy had the Zephyrian students create a resonance frequency that would make the soldiers' armor vibrate. The vibration was not dangerous, but it was extremely uncomfortable and made it impossible to aim their weapons accurately. The Aquarian students flooded different sections of the complex with various gases. Not sleeping gas this time, but gases that would make the soldiers' vision blurry or cause them to sneeze uncontrollably. The result was chaos. The Dominion soldiers stumbled through the complex, unable to communicate with each other, unable to see clearly, unable to shoot straight. They were trained for direct combat, not for dealing with environmental hazards and technical malfunctions. Amy's student teams picked them off one by one, using hit-and-run tactics that kept the soldiers confused and disoriented. They would appear from hidden passages, stun a few soldiers, then disappear before the rest could react. Within an hour, all 100 soldiers were captured. Commander Scar's voice came over the communication system again, this time with a hint of respect mixed with his anger. Who is in charge of your defenses? Amy activated the communication system. This is Amy Carter. I am a student here. There was a long pause. You are the one causing these problems? If by problems you mean stopping you from hurting innocent students, then yes. You are only delaying the inevitable, Commander Scare said. I have 1,000 soldiers on my ships. I will send them all if necessary. Go ahead, Amy replied. We are ready for them. But privately, Amy was worried. She had been successful so far because she had been fighting small groups of soldiers in a confined space. If Commander Scare sent all his soldiers at once, she was not sure her defenses would hold. She needed to change the rules of the game. Amy gathered her team, leaders in the control room. We cannot keep playing defense forever, she told them. We need to take the fight to them. How? Asked Kethvar, the Zephyrian student who had once insulted her. He was now one of her most dedicated followers, amazed by her tactical abilities. We need to disable their ships, Amy said. If we can stop them from sending more soldiers, we can hold out until help arrives. But how can we reach their ships? Asked Nethwa, a young Aquarian who had proven excellent at coordinating the gas attacks. Amy smiled. We are going to use their own boarding craft against them. She explained her plan. The captured Dominion soldiers had arrived in small attack ships that were still docked with the Academy. Amy wanted to take a team of volunteers, board one of the ships, and use it to approach the main Dominion fleet. That is suicide, said Zektar, one of the hive mind students. They will shoot us down as soon as they see us. Not if we are in one of their own ships, Amy replied. And not if we approach them like we are returning from a successful mission. Amy had studied the Dominion's communication codes using the captured equipment. She knew how their ships identified each other and how they requested permission to. Doc, once we get close to their main ship, Amy continued, we can plant a virus in their computer systems. A virus that will disable their weapons and engines. What kind of virus? Asked Keth Vayar. Amy held up a small device. The hive mind students have been working on something special. A program that will make their computers think they are under attack from multiple directions. It will cause them to shut down their weapons to prevent friendly fire incidents. The team looked at the device with amazement. It was small, no bigger than Amy's thumb, but it contained code that could cripple an entire fleet. The beauty of it, Amy continued, is that it uses their own safety protocols against them. Dominion ships are programmed to avoid shooting each other. If we can make them think their own ships are enemies, they will disable their weapons rather than risk destroying their own fleet. Amy selected 5 volunteers for the mission. Kethver insisted on coming, despite the danger. Nethwa volunteered her skills with fluid systems, knowing they might need to deal with the ship's life support. 2 hive mind students, Zektar and Hicksnell, came to handle the technical aspects of the virus upload. They put on captured Dominion armor and boarded one of the enemy attack ships. Amy had spent hours studying the ship's controls, figuring out how to fly it. Human brains, she had discovered, were excellent at learning new systems quickly. Remember, Amy told her team as they prepared to launch, we are supposed to be Dominion soldiers returning from a successful capture mission. Act confident and bored, like this is routine. The small ship detached from the academy and flew toward the Dominion fleet. Amy's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady as she contacted the main ship. Attack Craft 7 returning from boarding mission, she said, using the captured communication codes. Requesting permission to dock for prisoner transfer. There was a pause. Then a gruff voice responded. Acknowledged. Attack Craft 7. Proceed to docking bay 3. Amy could hardly believe it had worked. The Dominion fleet was so large and busy that one small ship returning was not unusual. They were approaching the main command ship, a massive vessel that dwarfed the Academy. As they got closer, Amy could see the ship's weapon arrays pointed at the Academy. Dozens of cannons each. One capable. Commander Scar was very angry. Amy could see him on the main screen in the Academy's command center. His yellow eyes were glowing with rage, and his sharp teeth were bared in a snarl. Behind him, she could see the bridge of his command ship, with technicians running around trying to fix their damaged systems. You think you are clever, human, Commander Scare said, his voice like grinding metal. You have caused me great inconvenience, but I am not finished with you. Amy stood in front of the screen, no longer the quiet student who had been ignored for months. Around her, students and faculty from every species watched with respect and amazement. She had proven herself as a leader and a strategist. Your fleet is disabled, Amy replied calmly. Your computer systems are corrupted. Many of your soldiers are captured. Perhaps it is time to consider surrender. Commander Scar laughed, a harsh sound that made everyone in the command center uncomfortable. Surrender? To a child? I think not. He leaned forward, his reptilian face filling the screen. I challenge you to single combat, human. Not physical combat, but a battle of minds. A test of strategy and tactics using the Academy's combat simulation systems. Amy felt her heart skip a beat. She had heard of such challenges. They were an old tradition among some warrior species, a way to settle disputes without massive bloodshed. What? Are the terms? She asked. Simple, Commander Scare replied. We will fight a series of strategic battles in simulation. If you win, my fleet will withdraw and never bother this academy again. If I win, the academy surrenders unconditionally, and I take everyone aboard my ships as prisoners. Director Zenth stepped forward. Amy, you do not have to accept this challenge. We can wait for help from the Galactic Council. Amy looked around the command center. She saw the faces of her fellow students, the ones who had followed her into battle and trusted her with their lives. She saw the faculty members, who had once dismissed her as a primitive human. She thought about all the other academies the Dominion had destroyed, all the students who had been taken prisoner, all the knowledge that had been lost. If she could stop it here, if she could prove that the Dominion could be defeated, maybe others would find the courage to fight back. I accept, Amy said. Commander Scar's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Excellent. We will use the Academy's advanced simulation chamber. 3 scenarios. Best 2 out of 3 wins. Amy nodded. She had used the simulation chamber before, though never for military exercises. It was an incredible piece of technology that could create realistic virtual environments for any kind of training. I want witnesses, Amy said. Representatives from every species, broadcasting the challenge to the entire galaxy. Commander Scar looked surprised. Why? Because I want everyone to see what happens when the Dominion picks a fight with the wrong opponent. An hour later, Amy stood in the simulation chamber while technicians prepared the systems. The chamber was a large spherical room that could create any environment imaginable. Students and faculty crowded around the viewing galleries, and Amy knew that across the galaxy, millions of beings were watching the broadcast. Commander Scare appeared as a hologram in the chamber with her. In the simulation, they would command virtual armies and fleets, testing their strategic abilities against each other. The first scenario, Commander Scare announced, is a planetary assault. You will defend a world against my invasion force. The chamber transformed around them, creating a detailed world with cities, mountains, and oceans. Amy found herself commanding the planet's defenses while Commander Scare controlled a massive invasion fleet. Amy studied the situation quickly. The planet had limited defensive satellites and a small fleet of patrol ships. Commander Scar's force was 10 times larger, with heavy cruisers and assault transports. Most commanders would try to meet the invasion fleet in space, hoping to stop them before they reached the planet. But Amy had learned from her human ancestors that sometimes the best defense was to let the enemy come to you. She pulled her ships back to the planet's surface, using them to supplement the ground-based defenses. When Commander Scar's fleet arrived, she did not try to stop them from landing. Instead, she waited until his forces were spread across the planet's surface, then struck at their supply lines. She used small, fast ships to attack the enemy transports. While they were unloading, she targeted their communication centers and fuel depots. Commander Scar's larger ships were too big to operate effectively in the planet's atmosphere. They were designed for space combat, not for supporting ground operations. Within hours, his invasion force was cut off from supplies and unable to coordinate their attacks. Amy won the first scenario. Commander Scare looked frustrated. You fight like a coward, hiding behind defensive positions. I fight like someone who wants to win, Amy replied. Scenario 2. The second scenario was a fleet battle in deep space. This time, Amy and Commander Scar had equal forces, meeting in open battle with no planets or asteroids to provide cover. This was Commander Scar's specialty. His ships formed perfect battle lines, advancing in disciplined formation with overlapping fields of fire. It was the classic Dominion tactic, using superior firepower and coordination to overwhelm enemies. Amy looked at her fleet and realized She could not win a direct engagement. Her ships were good, but not better than the Dominion vessels. In a straight fight, Commander Scar would destroy her dot, so she did not fight straight. Amy divided her fleet into small groups and sent them in different directions. Commander Scar's formation began to spread out as he tried to pursue all the different groups at once. Amy's ships moved in seemingly random patterns, appearing to retreat in disorder. Commander Scar pressed his advantage, pushing deeper into the battlefield as he chased what he thought were fleeing enemies. But Amy's movements were not random. She was leading Commander Scar's fleet into a carefully planned trap. When his ships were spread out and disorganized from the pursuit, Amy's scattered groups suddenly converged from all directions. Commander Scar found himself surrounded, his perfect formation broken, his ships isolated and vulnerable. Amy's forces attacked from multiple angles, using the Dominion fleet's own momentum against them. Amy won the second scenario. The viewing galleries erupted in cheers. Students from every species were shouting and applauding, amazed by what they had witnessed. Even some of the faculty members were smiling. Commander Scar stared at Amy with something that might have been respect. "How did you learn to fight like this?" "From my people's history," Amy replied. "Humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years. We have learned that the biggest army does not always win. Sometimes the smartest army wins." "There is still one scenario left," Commander Scar said, but his voice was less confident than before. The third scenario was the most complex yet. Amy and Commander Scar each controlled multiple worlds, fleets, and armies in a war that spanned several solar systems. It was like a giant chess game, but with millions of pieces and dozens of different objectives. Amy studied the situation carefully. This was not a battle that could be won quickly. It was a war of resources and logistics, of planning and patience. Commander Scar began aggressively, launching attacks on multiple fronts. His strategy was to overwhelm Amy with the sheer scale of his assault, forcing her to spread her forces too thin to defend everything. But Amy had learned something important from studying the Dominion's previous campaigns. They were excellent at winning battles, but they were not as good at winning wars. They focused on immediate tactical victories without thinking about long-term strategic consequences. Amy let Commander Scar win several early battles, giving up less important worlds while concentrating her forces to defend key strategic positions. She focused on protecting her industrial worlds and supply lines, even if it meant losing territory. While Commander Scar was celebrating his victories, Amy was building. She used her secure industrial base to construct new ships and train new armies. She developed new technologies and improved her logistics networks. Commander Scar had won more battles, but Amy was winning the war. The turning point came when Amy launched a coordinated offensive against Commander Scar's overextended forces. His armies were spread across dozens of worlds, trying to hold all the territory they had conquered. Amy's concentrated forces struck at key points, cutting off entire sections of the Dominion fleet from their supplies. Within days, Commander Scar's empire began to collapse. His forces were starving and out of ammunition. His fleets could not reach the battle zones in time to make a difference. Amy won the third scenario decisively. The simulation chamber fell silent. Commander Scar stared at the strategic display, unable to believe what had happened. He had been outmaneuvered by a human student, defeated by strategies he had never encountered before. "How?" he asked quietly. Amy looked at him with something almost like sympathy. "You think like a conqueror," she said. "You focus on taking things, on showing your strength. But I think like a defender. I focus on protecting what matters, on using my enemy's strength against them." She gestured to the viewing galleries, where students from dozens of species were watching. You see them as prizes to be won. I see them as allies to be protected. That is the difference between us." Commander Scar was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You hedge,"